So,
Okay, so we're live, Dr. Raja. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Facebook Live session from Dementia Carers Count. It's our carer clinic with practicing elderly and dementia care specialist, Dr. Raja. And we are here today to do a follow-on session on moving home and planning for the future. It was a Facebook Live we started 1 or 2 weeks ago, and we knew that we were being a bit optimistic to cover everything that we wanted to discuss in that first session. So we decided to put on this second session. If you haven't seen the first session, then there is a recording available of it. You can find it on our Facebook channel and also our YouTube channel as well. And we will make this session available also, so you could watch the two back to back if you wanted to another time. So for us to get started today, Dr. Raja, I just wondered if you could just give us a brief recap of what we covered last time during the session.
thanks. Good morning, everyone. So the last time that we had the session, we focused on the kind of challenges that people could face, which would lead to conversation about transition to a different environment, increasing level of care. So the kind of challenges could be broadly grouped into challenges in terms of behavioral difficulties that people with dementia might present, challenges in terms of personal hygiene, nutrition, hydration for people with dementia, and the resultant stress on carers, including difficulties in terms of having to manage risk of aggression and things like that. So we discussed about the challenges, and then we discussed about the assessments that need to happen in terms of deciding about the level of care that would be required to support the person with dementia and their carers. So focusing on occupational therapy assessments, functional assessments, assessments of carers for the degree of stress that they experience, and financial assessments. All of those would feed into decision making about recognizing the need for care, the level of care, and the environment in which a degree of care has to be provided. And also we started last session with a case, and I thought it'll be good to add another case this time around. So if you don't mind, that'll be very brief, I promise. So there was this elderly gentleman that I happened to see in a care home some years ago, and he was referred with a degree of behavioral challenge, and then I went and had a conversation with him, and then I found that he was interested in jazz music, and all it took to manage his behavior in a care home was to get a functioning radio and to have jazz FM on it most of the time, which he related to, and he was very calm and was able to talk about some of his good times in life. So it just goes on to say that we need to know a lot more about the individual, and that's where having those kind of assessments becomes very useful in determining what would be needed to support and improve the quality of life of someone with dementia wherever the environment is.
Thank you, and thank you for the case study as well. I think, as you say, it gives us so much information about a person's background that can help to support when choosing and deciding on care plans, where care may take place, and so on. So important to know a person's background, and I know we'll come on to that in this session as well. It's interesting also that you used or you gave us a case study where a big influence for that person was jazz. So music was really important to him, and had a number of influences. And we have a Facebook Live starting next week with Grace Meadows, where we'll be looking at the power of music in supporting family carers and people with dementia. And that's on Monday night. So we'll put some details of that in the links during this session, or we'll put them on Facebook afterwards for people to see those. And it's all within part of a lead up to Thank You Day this year, which is focusing on thank you to sort of all those people who are unpaid carers in the UK. And we've teamed with Music for Dementia to really highlight the positivity that music can bring, and the support music can bring to people's care plans and choices of care. So thank you for flagging that one. Actually, it was really relevant. So just to say to people, if you want to put any comments in the box or any questions, please do so, and we'll try to answer them during this session. As always, if we don't get to them, we will try to answer your questions afterwards. And if you don't want to put it in the box and put it anonymously, that's also fine, and we can work through those with you as well. So, Roger, you've spoken about that the assessments need to take place. There will have been some challenges for people, and they could be very different challenges for different people, different types of assessments. And then we get to the point where perhaps there needs to be a communication, either between various family members, but also very much importantly involving the person with dementia, when there could be potential changes in care and support. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on sort of navigating those communications between the person with dementia and other family members.
I think it's important to recognize and be open to the idea that it is going to be a difficult conversation to be had, and sometimes conversations may not actually be possible because the person with dementia may not be in a great state of understanding or communicating their needs in an easy way for us to understand. So the nature of the conversation itself is going to be difficult, partly because of the understanding from the person with dementia. They could have their own beliefs, their lifelong held beliefs, which should influence such conversations, the lifestyle choices that they would have made through their life and would continue to maintain. So that would be something that we need to take into account. And if that was with the person with dementia, then for the family care or the family members, they would have their own perspective on what needs to be happening to support their loved one with dementia. Amongst those kind of thoughts, they would also be experiencing a lot of anxiety, the fear of unknown in terms of what's going to happen. That can lead to sometimes a depressed mood state, a lot of guilt, a lot of grief. Excuse me. So I think those kind of emotional states and the fear of unknown would make it difficult for the family member or family members involved to make those conversations flow easily, which is why I think it would be very helpful to get professional help at that point of time, whether it's mental health services, social care, or advocacy services, or charities, or even picking up the phone and calling us on our support line. That would help them to have some pointers which would be very helpful for them to address during the consultation process, but also have that reflective space where they can discuss about their emotions and get that degree of support so that they can really focus on the more kind of planning things that they will have to do. So it is a difficult conversation, but there is support out there, and it's very important that people with dementia and their carers don't feel that they are there on their own, and they have to utilize the support networks that are available, including ourselves.
Thank you. And there are so many aspects, I think, Raja, that you've very eloquently covered there. Financial, emotional, practical, sort of challenges, both for a person with dementia and the family carer. And as you say, it's really important to seek the help, either to support yourself, to be able to reflect on the situation, to look at the practicalities of the situation and what can support you. But also, one of the first things you said there was that you may be trying to have a conversation with a person with dementia who is struggling to understand what you're saying verbally or being able to communicate their own wishes. And just to reiterate what you said, it's so important to look at the background again, isn't it? And to know what this person perhaps would have wanted in the past. But also to draw on the skills of those teams of people around, whether it's a speech and language therapist, an occupational therapist, and so on, to say, well, actually, how can we present this information in the best possible way that would give the person with dementia an opportunity to be able to understand it? So it might be that beginning to use different methods such as communication charts and so on that can help them to understand the process. and to communicate some of their choices when perhaps language and speech is beginning to become a bit more difficult for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I think it would be good to reflect on the idea of capacity assessments, which are vital at this particular point in time. And when you think about how to enhance the ability of the person with dementia to arrive at a decision that they would be wanting to make themselves, then the Mental Capacity Act lays out that every effort should be made to try and include the person with dementia, and every effort should be made to try and increase their ability in terms of understanding, weighing the decision that they're making. So there is a legal requirement on part of us as mental and social care services for anyone who's involved in the process to try and facilitate that degree of understanding. And it takes me back to a time where I saw someone with dementia who also had motor neuron disease. And it is very difficult for them to communicate, but to have special computerized equipment which they could use to to provide brief but very important messages in terms of what they would want to happen was extremely helpful. So it's that degree of um, complexity that we deal with, and we need to demonstrate that we're trying our very best to try and include the person with dementia. And I think that's where sometimes it might be useful to have independent advocates where there are conflicting views between various family members or between services or even between people with dementia and their own family. So I think it's very important to try and make sure that the person with dementia is involved as much as possible. If they have completed an advanced directive, that would be very helpful. It makes things a lot easier, and I would recommend anyone who's watching this to start making those. I'm not saying that you would have dementia now, but it's better to have these kind of conversations at the time where we are comfortable thinking about those things rather than trying to work in crisis mode, which becomes very difficult. But equally, to complete things like having delegated power of attorney for making these particular decisions to someone who would be able to represent the person with dementia adequately. So we do have it within our wisdom to try and sort these things before things change. And where someone with dementia has already made these choices, I think it'd be very important to look at them and to try and make it work for them.
And I think you're right, the earlier we can do a lasting power of attorney, the better, rather than waiting for something to happen, isn't it? I have mine in place, and even my 22, 23-year-olds, I'm trying to encourage to get them to get their lasting power of attorneys in place because it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important for us to stress here at this point that there are two different power of attorneys, one for property and finances and one for health and welfare. Obviously, everyone will be very familiar with property and finances, which again is very important because we did discuss about the importance of financial assessment as part of care provision. But more importantly, it's health and welfare power of attorney that's going to be very helpful because they will be having the legal power to influence these conversations. So we need to try and make sure that we complete both.
Okay. So far we've covered through week one some of the challenges that someone might be facing when they're thinking about a change to a care home, some of the assessment processes that take place. And so far today, I think we've talked about a range of sort of the legal considerations, practical considerations, emotional considerations, and financial considerations, and why it's important to support from maybe the multidisciplinary team around you, local charities, also calling our care line as well, where we can sort of help and reflect and give space to talk things through. We also have a 4-week course that we run, which is very, very popular and goes into some of the things we're scratching the surface on today, Raja, in huge amounts of details. So we look at all of those legal, emotional, practical, financial kind of aspects. And the next run of that course is starting on the 4th of August, and we will put details of that course within the chat so that you can have a look at that and book onto it if you want. It's run by a multi-professional team teams. So we have social work input, we have nursing input, OT input, speech and language therapy input. So all those things around mental capacity and trying to involve the person with dementia in the decision making as much as possible is all in that course and really useful. The other thing that is in the course in detail, but I wondered if we could touch on here, Raja, is what kind of things should carers be considering when they're in the process of looking for an appropriate care home?
Yes, so it's never going to be a straightforward decision to make, but there are certain things that that could be helpful. So I think the first and important thing is to try and make sure that there's a clear understanding of the actual needs. Some of them might have more of nursing, physical health needs. Some of them might have more kind of dementia behavior management type of needs. So it's very important to understand what is the major need and whether the particular care home, nursing home, residential home is able to manage those very specific needs. So I think that should be the first and important guiding principle. The second important thing would be to try and understand the stage of dementia that someone is at. For example, residential care homes might be able to manage someone with early to moderate stages of dementia, whereas when the dementia advances, you might have to look at a nursing home to manage more significant needs, whether it's physical health or mental health. And at this point, it's also important to understand that we do not really want people with dementia to have multiple transitions, so going from a home to a residential home to a nursing home. So if a placement has both residential and nursing options for dementia on the same site, but in different levels or different buildings as such, then it will be very helpful because it'll be the same place, and that would make it much easier for them. It's also important to have a look at the nursing home, not necessarily from how it looks structurally or whether it's been painted well, decorated well. Obviously, those things are very important, but more importantly, the kind of mix of residents that they have in that particular care placement. Because we just want to make sure that the person with dementia is amongst a group of people who are the similar level of functioning ability. We don't want someone who is in the early stage to be with people with dementia in an advanced stage, and that might just stop them from having that degree of social conversation. So it's very important to look at the mix of residents and also the skill and the activities that happen in that particular care placement. Most care placements will have a activities coordinator. It'll be useful to ask them for an idea of the kind of weekly activities that they happen or the kind of weekly activities that they've had in the last week. So it might be something useful. Most placements do have gardens and open spaces, and for people who like to walk or enjoy gardening or sunshine, it's useful to have that kind of environment. Some people might like reading or having music being played. So it's just trying to understand the environment and how it could be optimized to make it helpful for the person with dementia and the specific interests or hobbies that they might have, and also to try and make sure that that the care home has got varied professional groups, or at least have access to varied professional groups to try and support. It will also be important to try and understand the access to GP services that the care placement has, because it'll be good to have an initial conversation with the GP at the point of transfer of care, just to make sure that the GP is aware of any advance directives that are there, or the kind of sealing of care documents, like the respect form, that may need to be completed then. So it's important to have that vital GP link, and also try and understand the kind of referral process to mental health services from the care home, because some care homes might have regular mental health services going in once a month or something like that. Some of them might have ad hoc arrangements with mental health services. So it's important to try and understand how it works to support the person with dementia. So I think essentially it's trying to understand the environment, the degree of activities, the mix of residents, the varied professional groups, and the access to healthcare. That would be the kind of broad aspects to look at when considering care placements.
So many useful tips there, Dr. Raja, and it's made me think. I wonder whether at some point it might be useful for us to do a guide for people about if you are changing GP or you want to sort of review things with your GP or a different GP, to think about those documents such as the ceiling of care and the respect form, because I'm not sure everyone will know about respect forms and that they're really important. So I think maybe if we, after this, have a chat about maybe putting on another session like that. I think the other thing you talked about there was that not necessarily to be preoccupied by how a place looks. Is it old? Is it new? Yes, okay, it's got to be maintained and to look, you know, that it's kept up, well kept, but also to really drill down into what would be right for that individual. And always remember, you're choosing a care home for that person, not yourself. And I've certainly seen situations where families have felt something looks absolutely fantastic. And then they've visited it with the person with dementia, and the person with dementia has a very different personality and a very different background. And what suited the family was not something that really pushed the buttons of the person with dementia, and that's really important to think about, isn't it? I have a sibling who would love a very vibrant, happy, well, everyone would like happy, but a very vibrant place with lots and lots of activities. I have another sibling who probably would want something a little bit more quieter and smaller and more compact. So knowing about the person is really important, isn't it? To be able to think about that. And again, you can talk to our practitioners. They can help you think through some of those documents that can help you to think about what would be right for somebody and what would be suitable for them, and help you to decide. But again, I just want to stress something else you said, which was you put it as not multiple transitions. So important that a placement that would allow the care to grow and develop as the dementia progresses for that individual person. Really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one easy way of looking at would be I would say to people that I come across in my clinic, just think about what your mom or dad or husband or wife would do during the weekends, because that's what would define what kind of day planning they will need in a care home environment. And if we could try and simulate to an extent, replicate that, then that would be very helpful in an unfamiliar environment.
And it goes back to your case study right at the start, doesn't it? The chap with who loved his jazz, and is that available and is it accessible in the care home? Whereas somebody else, it might be around gardens, or it might be around animals, or something else, and knowing that and putting that in. So once all this has been considered, a huge mammoth task, not an easy one for family care, is really difficult, then it's important to remember there isn't just one course of action from there, is there?
No, absolutely. I think that's the important thing. There's no right or wrong answer. We are human beings. We are working with human beings, and therefore it is a complex process, and there is no right way to there's no right answer, but there's a way to doing things, which is including the person with dementia and supporting the family members through the process. What I would say is that whatever we do needs to be proportionate to the degree of care needs and managing risky situations. That's the very best that we could aim for, that we are making proportionate decision, because the law expects us to be least restrictive, but conventionally we want everything to be safe. So there is an immediate conflict between what law asks and what we want to see happen. So that conflict is going to be there, which is why it's going to be a proportionate course of action rather than right or wrong course of action as such, and which is why I think it's important for a wider consultation to be held, every help to be utilized, including contacting us through our support line.
Okay, thank you. Let's say that then a decision has been made, perhaps somebody has moved to a care home, and that might be you know, there'll be lots of people listening here where perhaps a move to a care home has been through a crisis, something has happened and we've had to do a really quick move to a care home. It might be more planned, you know, what we've talked about here, all of those considerations over a period of time being taken into consideration. But the person's moved into a care home. There's a question here from somebody saying, how often should you visit someone in a care home?
Well, again, there isn't any prescribed solution to that particular question. I think it's important to understand that the initial few weeks are going to be very difficult for the person with dementia who has transitioned into a different placement. So they need that degree of time to adapt to the new environment, for them to understand the new routines, to become more familiar with the carers who are providing care and support, to understand the mix of other residents they are with. So that needs to happen without much degree of disturbance. And equally, it's a period of respite for the family carer who would have been doing all these kind of supportive things for weeks and months. So the first few weeks, I think it's good to have that kind of cooling period where the person with dementia is getting used to the new environment. The person who's a family member gets to grips with what's happening in their own life and have that degree of break to have things going on, to deal with things going on in their life. But beyond that, I think it would be trying to have some regularity and a frequency that makes it easier for the carer, as in the family member, to be making most of the time and equally trying to make sure that they do lead a balanced life themselves. So for some of them, it might be that they're very close to the care home and it's just a 5-minute walk. So there's no harm in going and spending some time during the afternoon with their loved one. But that's not really expected, and people should not feel guilty that they are not able to do that. For other people, it might be a weekend visit where they spend an entire day or half a day, or take their loved one from the care home to somewhere to eat or to walk. So I think it's important to understand that what we do as family carers is something that we can manage, that it doesn't cause further stress to us, and that it actually feeds into the established activity scheduling within the care home, and that when we walk out of the care home at the end of the activity, we do feel that we've done our best. So that should be important for us to think about.
Thank you. And again, we can explore that much more with carers if they do that than we can in a half an hour Facebook Live, which is always quite difficult, isn't it? So I think the important thing is to think about the needs of the person with dementia, but also to think of your own needs as a carer and negotiate with the care home, particularly in those first few weeks, what's appropriate for that person and what for you. I think, you know, as you importantly said, there's a time where the person with dementia is adapting to the new environment and the people around, but there's also a period of time where you as a carer, you're adapting, you're perhaps getting a little bit more rest, you know, you're having an unbroken night's sleep, you've got a bit of space to look after yourself physically as well as emotionally. But often it's difficult emotionally because suddenly there's this role transition. And lots of carers tell us they sense a sense of guilt or a sense of grief that the person isn't there anymore at home, and a role transitions of getting used to perhaps carers doing things that you've been doing a long time yourself in your own certain way, and the carers are doing it slightly different. So I think the other thing to consider in that negotiating, and I just wonder if you have any thoughts on this, Raja, is that negotiating the visiting, negotiating how that will take place, but also how importantly you'll look after your own self when you leave as well, but also negotiating perhaps working alongside the care home if you still want to be involved in providing some of that care, because you are still a carer, you're supporting the emotional needs if not the physical needs of the person with dementia, and you might want to be involved in that physical care as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are several examples that I could think of where it's worked very effectively, where the time that the family member goes to visit is also part of certain degree of provision of care, whether it's physical care or emotional support. And I think that's where I think it would be very important to try and have that conversation at the very beginning, and have that degree of flexibility as the dementia progresses to to change what a family carer does during this particular visit, because it might vary as the illness progresses. So I think I think it's important to have that initial conversation. It's also very important to try and find the balance between the care being about the visit being about the relationship, and as opposed to the visit being about care. And guilt will come because we may not be in a position to provide that degree of care that we would want to. But it's important to recognize that as the illness progresses, um, people with dementia need more kind of professional care rather than what we can do as family members. So it's important to retain that role as in its relationship form as the dementia progresses, but to perhaps reduce the physicality of the care as such, because that will become more complex and technical as the illness progresses. So it's that balance to be struck during the visits, I think, and be aware that that will change, and also have someone that they could discuss this with outside the care home environment, outside the kind of professional role, because it's always important, as you rightly said, to address guilt, grief that we could experience, and to have right degree of support for that.
Okay, thank you, Raja. We've hit the sort of gone past the 30 minutes again, so we're going to have to bring it to a close. But I think it's been really useful, a really useful discussion around almost communication is so important, isn't it? And early communication with other family members, communication with the person with dementia, and maybe new GPs, but also care homes, so that you can explore how the support is going to change as the dementia progresses, but also using family, friends, our support line, other charities, your local mental health team, to really be able to talk through some of this and make the most of the information available to you. I have mentioned several times the 4-week course that we have that looks in this in more detail, but also I think the other ones we've touched on this are our courses around mental capacity. I think that's really helpful in that decision-making process. So do have a look at the mental capacity course that we have, and also the one on communication, because that will give people lots of ideas on how to communicate with a person with dementia so that they understand as much as possible the information being presented to them, and providing ways for that person to communicate. Used a lovely example of somebody with motor neuron disease using an electronic communication. For many people with other types of dementia, that wouldn't be possible, but visual aids might be, picture and symbol boards. So we are going to have to come to a close. Thank you so much, Dr. Raja, yet again, for doing this session with us. Is there any last thing you'd like to say before we finish? That's putting you on the spot, isn't it?
I think you, as you rightly said, communication is the key. Help the person with dementia to communicate in any shape or form that they could, and for the family member to communicate to as many people as they can to get that right degree of support. And where it gets frustrating, because it is quite a challenging journey, and we need to acknowledge that, then to seek agencies like ourselves to get that degree of support that they need.
Thank you. And if we haven't got to any of your questions or comments, and we haven't had a chance to get to them, then we will do, and someone will get back to you. So thank you once again, Dr. Raja.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, everyone.